Greetings and welcome to the another episode of the Business Talk podcast. I am Deepak, here to guide you through the trends shaping the world of business. I am delighted to welcome Professor Sebastiano Massaro, Associate Professor at Surrey Business School, as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Professor Massaro is also a Surrey Fellow affiliated with the Center for the Digital Economy, the Center for the Future of Work, and the Institute for People-Centered Artificial Intelligence. Prior to joining Surrey, he was an assistant professor of behavioral science at Warwick Business School and co-directed the global research priority in behavioral science at the University of Warwick. A trailblazer in the field of organizational neuroscience, Dr. Sebastiano co-founded and is the current program chair of the Organizational Neuroscience and Biology Interest Group at the Academy of Management. Dr. Sebastiano's research is both theoretically and methodologically focused on defining the scholarly frontiers of organizational neuroscience. Empirically, he explores how affect and cognition interaction in decision-making contexts, ranging from moral to strategic and interpersonal decisions, with a particularly emphasis on the healthcare sector, where he also applies AI-driven approaches. Dr. Massaro holds the first ever PhD in management science from the UCL School of Management. He also earned degrees in neuroscience from the University of Trieste and the International School of Advanced Studies, as well as in the neuroimaging from the University of Edinburgh. His work has been published in leading journals, including Nature Biotechnology, The Lancet, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and Organizational Research Methods. Professor Sebastiano has received multiple awards for both his research and teaching, and his work has been featured in international media. In this episode, Professor Sebastiano Massaro shares valuable insights from his research, Decoding Organizational Neuroscience, Mapping the Frontiers of a New Discipline. So without further delay, let's welcome Professor Sebastiano Massaro to the podcast. We are honored to welcome you, Professor Sebastiano. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Deepak. Thank you very much for having me.
To begin, could you give us a brief overview of what organizational neuroscience is and how it emerged as a distinct interdisciplinary field?
Certainly. So as you know, the name says, organizational neuroscience is the combination of organizational studies and neuroscience. More specifically, I would say, is the use of neuroscience insights, empirical evidence, theoretical frameworks, and methods into bettering our understanding of organizational life, organizational behavior, behavior of organizational actors. So the field is relatively new. Started around like 2010 with some early theorizing about organizational cognitive neuroscience, and then later on it emerged as a field in its own right, named organizational neuroscience within the broader domain of the management disciplines and management studies. However, I would say it's only since 2021-22 that organizational neuroscience has become institutionalized and recognized as a field in its own right. And as you rightly say that before in my introduction, it was because together with several colleagues we spearheaded a big effort to make sure that within the Academy of Management, which is the largest professional body for business school scholars, there was an interest group specifically dedicated to investigate organizational neuroscience and to see how neuroscience can help to advance our understanding of organization. And it is such an evolving field that very recently we actually wanted to add also biology, just to give a broader understanding of what we mean by neuroscience. And it has a lot of implication because it's it was like maybe a trend given the previous neuroeconomics, neuromarketing approaches that emerged in the wider social sciences literature. But then there was also dissatisfaction with the self-report, behavioral data. So there was also a compelling need to have, stronger empirical evidence that was able to provide a mechanistic insight into behavior of organizational actors. So that's in a few sentences what is organizational science and how it came about in a way.
Professor, what theoretical foundations, whether from neuroscience or management, have most significantly shaped organizational neuroscience as it stands today?
Yeah, I would say organizational neuroscience as a field has roots both in the management and in neuroscience theories per se. I mean, we shall not forget actually that already in the 50s, late 50s, I mean, Marx and Simon were actually talking about organizations as brains. I mean, clearly back then they didn't have the tools that we have now, so it was just theorizing. Focused on a metaphorical approach to this organization as thinking brain. However, from the 90s onwards, thanks especially to the neuroimaging devices that we have available, and I would say more recently, in particular thanks to the to the wearables that are very very common, across I would say lay people, not just experimenter. We are trying to recognize more and more how the neuroscience information that is provided theoretically, such as the broader social neuroscience theory, the concept of affective neuroscience, the concept of dual process theories of cognition, fast and slow, Kahneman system 1, system 2, looking obviously at the neural or physiological evidence, are becoming more and more prevalent in the discussion within organizational neuroscience. At the same time, because this is a mutual field, as I clarified before, there are also interesting inputs that are coming from the traditional management domains, for instance, leadership, for instance, social exchange theory, entrepreneurship research, entrepreneurship framework, all the momentum in entrepreneurial cognition, and even strategic management with the behavioral strategy. So it's really synergistic the way in which organizational neuroscience is developing, because it's not just we take neuroscience and we inform management, but we also have the opportunity to take management theories and use neuroscience and enrich also neuroscience understanding. One of the classic example I have is the concept of trust. Trust is investigating many social sciences, in sociology, in political sciences, in psychology, in neuroscience, and in management. And one of the key contribution of the management scholarship here was to theorize and empirically test, behaviorally at least, that trust has two components, the affective and the cognitive one. However, if you speak to let's say mainstream neuroscience this day, trust is mostly conceptualized in a almost economic way, with just, a clear, also an economic exchange, I would say, so just with the cognitive component. So that's just an example to show how there is a constant, I would say, dialogue between the two disciplines, theoretically and empirically.
What are some of the key methodological approaches used in organizational neuroscience, and how do they differ from traditional methods in management and organizational research?
Sure. So, I mean, I would say all the methods that are broadly speaking belonging to neuroscience. So we can go from the high resolution imaging, the classic fMRI or EEG or MEG. Those are all the clear first suspect, I would say, in regarding the use of neuroscience methods to improve or to advance management theory. However, as I hinted before, it's very important to also consider the new technologies that are emerging, and I'm also using a lot of them in my own research. Wearables that are able to capture physiological parameters such as heart rate variability or skin conductance. Eye tracking is another very powerful methodology. And what is I mean, they are all different in the sense they all capture different variables, different construct. They can be associated to different mental models in a way, if you want to look at the cognitive aspect related to the physiological understanding that is underpinning this method. But the general advantage, I would say, compared to classic management and organizational research methodology, which is mostly relying so far on self-reports, surveys, interviews, is that they provide, I would say, a more objective, a more generalizable, a more accurate, in certain respect, nature of the data set that then is going to be analyzing the studies. And most of all, they're offering the temporal dimension. So if you think about, me wearing a sensor or you wearing a sensor, and I just wear it for 24 hours, I have continuous measurements over 24 hours. I can capture the physiological state of a person over a day. I doubt that there will be anyone willing to self-report their, feelings or whatever they're thinking for 24 hours a day. And even so, there will be just, the lag time of just taking the pen or clicking the button on the mouse. So, I mean, clearly, there is a powerful methodological advancement. Obviously, it's not without limitation. I mean, there is a lot of discussion about the sample size, statistical power, logistical constraint, the cost, especially if you're looking like higher resolution technologies. Some scholars have argued against the idea of ecological validity because we are in a lab, but as I just mentioned, we have now technologies that allow us to go beyond the lab, and I think that's the real power of organizational neuroscience, because we can use differently from applied neuroscience or the neuroeconomics paradigm that have different backbones. What we can actually do is like we can consider organizations as an ecologic setting, and that's environment in which we then use neuroscience methods to conduct empirical research. But that's only on the empirical side. I want to reiterate that organizational neuroscience is also very much grounded on neuroscience per se. So there is all an aspect that hasn't been really explored so far in the literature about computational neuroscience, theoretical neuroscience that can have really powerful insights moving forward in the field. So there are many methods.
What challenges do researchers face when integrating neuroscientific tools like fMRI, EEG, or biometrics into organizational studies, especially in real-world settings?
Yeah, I would say, like, as I hinted before, one of the big concern is the idea of like ecological validity. So essentially, if I put someone in a scanner, in an MRI scanner, there isn't the ecologic setting around the person. So we can't really capture all the environmental, aspects that are surrounding the decision, the behavior of that certain person. So there is, a concern of artificiality, I would say, that is, often surrounding this methodology. Also, that there are some issues in a way about the sample size. If you have a particularly low sample size, which is fair enough. I mean, especially when you go with the high cost high cost technology. I mean, not everybody has the resources to perform like hundreds of thousands subjects for each study. But clearly, if you have a low sample size, there is an issue of statistical power, which doesn't meet the requirement to produce a robust enough scientific evidence. So there is always a balance of cost and benefit, I would say. And there is a huge literature actually in neuroscience which hasn't made inroads yet in the management world that is actually tackling this issue. So I think like as organizational neuroscience scholars and as a discipline, we do have a particularly powerful advantage compared to maybe other fields such as the neuroeconomics or the neuromarketing that are antecedents of us of about like a decade or so, because we know already the discussion that took place. So we don't really need to reinvent the wheel, and we can just be right there at the state of the art.
Yeah. Professor, how is organizational neuroscience reshaping our understanding of leadership, particularly in terms of impact on followers on their emotional regulation?
All right. So, I mean, leadership or neuro leadership, if I want to use this term, has been one of the first paradigm that has been investigated within the organization neuroscience. I mean, most of the research has been done by David Woolman, colleague of mine at University of Arizona State University, and most of the research on leadership has been done looking at a specific methodology, the EEG, the electroencephalography, looking at a different leadership style and how leadership style they differently impact the followers. Now, one of the consistent finding, I mean, there are many findings to be honest, is the idea that leadership has not only a social but also a neurobiological influence. And the influence that it has is actually showing a number of indexes of parameters that might be associated more likely to enhanced emotional regulation. So the more I'm able to regulate my emotion, the better. If you bear this late terminology here, I am as an effective leader. That's of course not always the case. It depends on the leadership style. It depends on the followers. So it's as in any field, it's impossible to make a one size fit all approach. But what is particularly relevant, I would say, about the leadership domain, not only is the first one that has really merged the idea of neuroscience and leadership, but also is the first one that has put forward the idea of neurofeedback, the idea that as regards practitioners, we can actually have a clear practical implication with our research. And the whole, thinking about the neurofeedback is that by showing the physiological signal, the neural signatures, I would say, if we're using brain level imaging, to the leaders, and we can actually educate leaders or train leaders, or to the very least make them aware about their physiological status. And I think this is quite powerful because is essentially what we do when say we're running and we have our wristwatch which is telling us like, hey, you're running too fast, your heart is beating too fast, you should slow down. Well, if you bear the analogy, that's similar in terms of principle. I mean, it's a loop whereby we learn from our own physiological signal. And what is important is that many of these physiological signal, they occur beyond our awareness. So we do have them because it's part of being humans, of living, but we do not always cognitively compute them. It would be just too costly if we had to factor in everything which is going on in our body. So it wouldn't be very efficient evolutionary.
Doctor, could you walk us through how insights from neuroscience can enhance our understanding of decision making under stress within organizations?
Yeah, I mean, there are several examples here. Also, some of my recent research is looking at that. We usually perform, empirical research, between group studies. We have two conditions essentially. One condition where participants are exposed to stressor, and one condition where they are not. And then we can wire them up with all the various tools that we want to look at. I particularly like using heart rate variability because it's a very well-known marker for stress. And what we see is that when they are exposed to a particularly stressful situation, through their heart rate variability, we can actually predict their decision making and also their performance. And one example is one research we've done together with a colleague, back when I was at Warwick. They now are in Glasgow and in Verona, where we were exposing participants to anger, and it was reported being a very, very stressful. It is a very, very stressful emotion if you think about that. And then we asked them to play a comparative game. And what we saw actually was the fact that anger was really impacting the cooperation output, the overall performance of the group that was exposed to the angry condition, and that was because of their their alteration of their heart rate variability, which, as I mentioned before, is a very, very close pattern of and proxy for stress, but also for emotional regulation. So essentially, I'm very stressed. I can't regulate well my emotion. I can't think rationally. I perform worse. I make worse decision. And this is quite interesting because it's nothing else than a theory that Herbert Simon, put forward many years ago, not just specifically about angers, but how emotion alter our decision making. And now we have the ability not only to test it empirically, but also to see what is the physiological mechanism that is supporting this. So I think it's particularly insightful in providing a good skeleton to management theory essentially.
With the rise of hybrid and remote work environments, how might organizational neuroscience help us design more cognitively and emotionally supportive workplaces?
Well, once again, I think the example of the neurofeedback is probably one of the best. It's not the only one, though. Research that I'm just about to begin with some colleague at Surrey is actually using eye tracking and a number of physiological sensors to see how people respond when they are in virtual environment versus when they are in natural environments. And this is very important, for instance, in terms of designing of space, because essentially, it's providing us and information on how, say, companies or firms that can design their offices just using a virtual environment, but also capturing not just how a participant or a potential employee likes or not the space, but actually seeing their autonomic and physiological reaction to that. So once again, we go back to what I was saying before about the relevance of these methods in this case to explain something which is beyond our own awareness.
As the use of neuroscience in organizational settings grow, and what ethical considerations do we need to keep in mind, especially around privacy, consent, and data use?
Well, I mean, there are many considerations to make as regards the ethical aspects. I mean, naturally, we are looking at the very intimate data. So there are all the data protection policies that we need to rightfully so keep in mind, and they go from just asking for informed consent to making sure that there is policy as regards the data treatment, the privacy of subjects, ensuring their autonomy, especially as regards research participant. But what I'm mostly concerned of is that field which is emerging, I would say semi-field, which is not organizational neuroscience, but it's pretty much a practitioner-led domain momentum of practitioners using neuroscience. And by practitioner, I mean anything that goes from the companies that are selling tools without disclosing their algorithm to consulting companies, having well-being programs where, they just give the gadget to the employees and then they make somehow some metrics about their performance or well-being and so on and so forth. Now, in theory, this is all nice and all cool. The problem is that if we don't have an open science approach to this, if we don't know the algorithm in which the parameters are made, if we don't know what the stress level flashy screen we have on our wristwatch or on our whatever app on the phone, then we are just blind to the actual data, and we're blind to the rigor in which this data extraction, cleaning, and analysis is done. And very often it's done by algorithms that they are proprietary. So in a way, there is a lot of momentum, especially in practice. But there are a lot of ethical concerns on whether these data are accurately captured and accurately used, and most of all accurately interpreted. And that's why this field, one of the purpose of this field is not just to remain at the theoretical empirical level, but it's really to engage with practitioners. And that's why I think it's particularly powerful, because it goes beyond the scholarly domain per se, but by nature, business school, management department, they interface with MBA students, just to name one, and to business, and to business practitioners. So I think we do have, a very important, scholarly role, but also ethical role in making the community aware about this issue. So I'm a bit less concerned about the scholarly criticism about, whether doing neuroscience is ethical in terms of reductionism and so on and so forth, because these are discussions that have already been done in cognitive field for about 20, 30 years. So there isn't much novelty in there. But in the use of practitioner and for practitioner of tools and implications for organization, that's where we need to keep an eye quite open.
Professor, my last question. Looking ahead, what do you see as the most promising or provocative frontiers for organizational neuroscience in the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, I wish I had the crystal ball to answer to this one. Unfortunately, I do not. So let me try, and we meet again in 5, 10 years, and then we see whether I was right. I would say, I mean, the natural suspect would be AI. Naturally, I mean, in a way, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, most of the algorithm on which AI is based, they actually derive from computation based on neural networks. So in a way, like in neuroscience, is a sort of like a godfather of AI, if we want to look in that way. Now, how AI is going to use together with organizational neuroscience, that would be interesting, because I do believe that there is opportunity to map more clearly and at least more rapidly, say, dynamic environments as we engage or as we collect brain data. So in terms of analytics, I think that would be very, very powerful. In terms of like broader implication of organizational neuroscience, I do believe the actual implementation in the workplace, especially given the real-time features of the tools and the ability to capture continuous measurement, continuous data, can be really powerful in terms of like having intervention related to well-being, stress, in general, burnout at work. Now, clearly, there will be, as we engage more and more with this technology, an important discussion that needs to take place, as regards the data governance on anything that regards, human computer, brain implementation interface. So I think, these are the areas to look at. Hopefully, there will be more and more theorizing as well, which is something that, as I said, has been lacking a bit. And there will be an understanding from practitioner that, yes, the brain is fancy. Neuroscience is not just the brain, but it's not enough to be fancy. It needs to be understood, learned, and potentially used in a right and ethical and rigorous way. Otherwise, we risk to have, a big hope and deliver very little at the end. So that's my wish in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, thank you. That brings us to the end of today's episode. It's been a real privilege to host Professor Sebastiano Massaro, whose pioneering work in organizational neuroscience is helping shape the future of management research and practice. From decoding the complex interplay of affect and cognition in decision making to applying AI-driven methods in healthcare, his insights have offered a compelling glimpses into the power and potential of interdisciplinary research. Professor Sebastiano's deep academic grounding, coupled with his innovative contributions, underscore the importance of bridging neuroscience, organizational behavior, and technology to address some of the most pressing challenges in today's workplace. On behalf of our listeners, thank you, Dr. Sebastiano, for joining us and for sharing your thought-provoking perspectives. We look forward to seeing how your work continues to evolve and inspire. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepak, and thanks to everybody for listening.